Okay, well, let's start with the Blues' beautiful balance. I've been super impressed by them. 8 wins in a row, and their coach Vossi was very happy with the way they're winning. And I think it's partly due to how well balanced the side is. So they've got competitive bigs, De Koning and Pitney, and for ruck round and all of my opinions on the importance or lack thereof of ruckman.
Yep.
The competitiveness of a ruckman is the fundamental. And they happen to have 2 guys now that are going bang, bang, and they've always got a really competitive, fresh big man who's in the middle. So that balance has been really good for them. They've got Manic Smalls, Fogarty, Owies, Motlop, amongst others. I think Martin's underrated with what he's doing. They've got clearance beasts, Cripps, Akers, who's a big-bodied wingman who gets up and back, but he's still in the stoppage spaces. Paddy Dow, who's come in and played a really important role, and Hewitt, who can play a stopper for them. They've got aerial power behind Wiedering, Kemp, who's stood up really well. They've got runners, Cottrell, Cunningham, Fisher, who's come in, recast as a halfback and gone through the roof. So he's added to their mix. So even their best looks better with him in the side, helping Sard and everyone off the back. And Doherty's, who's a really hard runner. And then they've got class, Curnow, and I think I put Martin into that.
Yeah.
So they've been able to build something and put together something based off the resilience and the competitiveness that Vossi spoke about. But every player in that side would feel like they're playing an important role. It would feel like their contribution is valued by their teammates, and that's an enormous. That's a great reason why they're where they're at. And it should give them great confidence going into the next 6 weeks.
The pressure that they brought, 21 forward, 50 tackles, the intensity that they are playing with, their hunt, their contest, but also Vossi's right in the fact that they're winning different ways. So, yep, they can do it brutally like they have done in games, but I just thought the way they picked apart Melbourne's defence early in that game as well, their ballmen that we were so critical of at stages through the first part of the year, that they were so predictable, and we're going, where's your method? You've got these 2 key pillars, 2 Coleman medalists, and you're not giving them a chance. They now are. And it's not with Mackay, but they're able just to change angles, hit the kick at the top of 45 inside forward 50, and they're giving their forwards an opportunity. So he's right in that. What a stunning turnaround it's been.
Yeah, and that takes me to point 2, and that is bigger is not always better. So comparing Melbourne and Carlton. Now, let's understand that was, as we've spoken about, a goal umpiring.
Yep, could have gone either way.
50-50 decision. You have to back the goalie on that one, but between winning and losing. So it's not, it's on a knife's edge. But we saw two players come in with 6 BNS, 4 Bluey Truscotts and 2 Copelands in Oliver and Grundy. Carlton have big names out of their team. It's not about bigger and better. It's not about names. It is going to be about balance. But Simon Goodwin had this to say about Brodie Grundy coming back in the side on Saturday.
Tough night for all forwards, I would have thought. We didn't have a lot of entries early. In the end, we probably used both of them in the ruck a little bit more than what we were planning for, but that was what the game needed at the time. So he'll evolve, he'll get better. As I said, it wasn't a free-flowing forward entry type of game. It was a lot of repeat entries, a lot of scrappy entries for both teams. So, we'll go back and have a look at it and assess it as we go.
I think Oliver coming in, that's a fait accompli, and he'll just get better as he gets back.
Pretty extraordinary performance from Oliver.
What do you have, 13 or 14 tackles?
Yeah, 13 tackles.
It was amazing. And you can't say that his contribution's not going to make you better, but it's not just about the performance of one person. It's about the balance across the team. Melbourne's balance, the balance that they have enjoyed for probably the last 5 or 6 weeks since coming home late in that last quarter burst against Brisbane on the G, was broken up by Harrison Petty's injury. So that has changed their balance. They can't replace that player with a like for like. They tried to do it with Grundy. Is that right? Is it wrong?
I just don't believe Simon Goodwin when he says he'll get better, he'll evolve. He won't. He's 29. He hasn't shown anything as a foot. He's not going to evolve. He's not going to get better. The only role that he is going to be successful at is playing as a ruckman.
One thing Simon Goodwin cannot say is that Brodie Grundy's a number one ruckman. We have a number one ruckman, and we can't play it for the balance.
Don't give me spin that he's going to evolve and get better as a forward. That's not happening. That's absolute rubbish.
I
He's
agree.
not
I agree.
Stand up as a forward.
I agree, but I've been in that position. You can't say anything else. You're not going to say that Brodie's not in our best side because he affects the balance, and that is in fact what the answer is. And that is a question now for Vossi.
But then he has to address it on Thursday if he leaves Grundy out of the side again. So he's just delaying the problem.
And he potentially will. Let's let that one go because I want to come back to Vossi's dilemma, which is how does he fit these players back? Now I think Marchbank for McGovern is probably so he's probably the guy that there's a like for like there that can make the change. Walsh for a runner. Now it'll be one of those runners. Now I don't is it Hollands on the wing? I think their wings are looking really strong. I think you want to maintain that balance in what they're doing. Did Doherty do a calf on the weekend? We don't know. There could be there. We know that Cunningham and Cottrell are the other two that have come in and been not just great with their run and their dash, but also with their contest. So there's a question, but Walsh would definitely come in. I think as good as Paddy Dow's going, he's playing Chera's minutes.
You think he's vulnerable?
Well, Chera just comes in. Chera has to come into that side because he's both inside and out. He was leading the BNF when he got injured, and he still could be. So Paddy Dow would be on the cusp, but how good to have that
he's
sort
a good
of
sub.
Or even to play a primary role as a midfielder. The one that stands out is Mackay. Is Harry Mackay, because he is Carlton's Brodie Grundy. Does he make the side better when he comes back in? And if he does come back in, for who? For one of those competitive ruckmen? It's a real question. And in the end, what's better? Does an A-grade player guarantee that the team is going to be better? The answer is no. The answer is no, and Vossi's going to have to work that out. The third one I have is Dog's Dilemma. We can unpack that Carlton one flat out. It asks a lot of questions, doesn't it? So Dog's Dilemma, like what Western Bulldogs threw up. Now Hawthorn have gone again, and all credit to them. But the questions need to be asked about Western Bulldogs and are they getting the best out of their crew? Bevo frustrated after the game. Number 1 or 2 contested ball team.
Most talented list in the comp.
Potentially.
Top 4 talented list in the comp.
How do you?
Well, look. Do you want me to read you the names?
Well, what we saw is Nash and McGuinness, 2 stoppers. Nash looked after Bontempelli for the best part. Bont has 23. That's not a big game by his standards. Libba gets knocked out.
Libba wasn't touching the ball he was knocked out.
And then Bailey Dale wasn't happy with that because then McGuinness goes back to Bailey Dale. He doesn't touch the ball. So you take away their inside game. And what it does is it highlights what the rest of the side looks like, and the rest of the side is just far too flaky. In and out of the contest, not reliable in their roles as such. There's too much variation in what they give, and when you've got high variation in your effort and your output, then you have high variation in the best and worst in what you produce as a team. When their engine is up and humming and going, they basically play the game in the front half. Their defenders only have to defend, length of the ground ball movement, and they're okay with that. But as soon as they're put under any pressure, they seem to fold.
He picked them apart. Mitchell played Luke Beveridge like a game of chess yesterday. So disposals 417 to 296. Uncontested. They were allowed to transition the ball, change angles. Uncontested marks 117 to 74, and they could not shut them down. This is a team that had been accused of not setting their list up to win this year. Like, this is a bad loss. Now, I don't know. I'm a broken record on the Dogs. Who have they beaten this year? Their record against top 8 sides. They concede another 6 goals consecutively. They're one of the worst in the teams in the competition at not being able to stop that. There's just so many questions. As I said a month ago, there needs to be the most forensic review you have ever seen. Look at everything about what is going on at the Dogs. And to your point about a coach and maximising what they've got, this isn't happening. So look at why and look at it as in detail as you have ever done.
Well, coaching against the Western Bulldogs, the thing that made them great was their work rate as a unit. So they would swarm, that outnumber you at the ball, and they still do that. but they would swarm. So it'd be their high forwards, their high backs, their wingers. They would be like midfielders anyway, and their handball game to get from the inside to the outside was what made them elite. I think that the size of that nucleus has reduced. They've still got, Dunkley's gone out. There's a few that have gone out. Caleb Daniels one that plays on the outside a little bit that adds to that, but they don't have as many of that type of player. I think, Poulter is not that player as a wingman. I think Bailey Smith is not actually that player as a wingman. I think the quality of their high forwards and high backs isn't quite there in the contest that they used to enjoy. So they've lost a little bit of their DNA. Now, whether that's in the picking or whether that's in the development, that's the type of review that needs to be done. Quickly, the last two, the Sydney Sleepers, they just keep getting it done. They've had some really close wins, but they did this last year. They got their game in order, and it just seems like they're doing the same thing this year. They did it last year off the back of contested ball and work rate and pressure, and that's all we're hearing out of Horse's mouth at the moment. And Warner's come back into the side. He adds to the mix. When any side that's got Papley, Hayward, and Heaney in that front part, let alone Kamadi's injuries going to test them a little bit, but McLean's still a really good aerial presence for them. I think Francis down back has probably settled them down again with McCartan, so they've got a little bit of aerial power behind them. I just think that the game this weekend, Sydney versus Adelaide, is huge. Adelaide have been an almost team. They've had 4 narrow losses against top 4 sides. And that's been the story of their seasons, but they're still up for grabs, and they're going to be hard to beat.
Only lost 1 out of their last 8 games, Sydney, and with Carlton, the informed team in the league. You did the game off at Adelaide Oval last night.
Yeah, Port Power and their midfield, just amazing. And this fella, Jason Horne-Francis, to be focused on his football rather than the stuff around it has been awesome to see, and he had a career night last night. But you look at what we saw in the back half of last year, and we sort of always seem to forget the evolution of things. But that decision was made. Port Adelaide had that 0-5 start in 2022, and then all of a sudden you see, okay, well, Kenny's made the decision that we've got to rotate and get our young guys in. So Roseanne Butters for the second half or the last 2/3 of last year, they just go in. And they go, okay, well, you just go for it. We're going to put our class where it matters, and we're going to see how it works out. Add Jason Horne-Francis to that. Willem Drew as a stopper and a ball getter. You've got Bergman on the wing, who didn't have much of it after quarter time, but 10 touches and 3 goals is a pretty good first quarter. So you've got this youth that's coming through. Wines plays just a supporting role. Travis Boak, who went out late, he can come in and play a supporting role to these boys. But I thought they got the Giants at their most vulnerable. Both Daniels and Bedford out of that side makes them a very different task for GWS, so I'd expect them to bounce back next week. But, I thought Port's performance after 4 losses in a row, it was very important for them to do that, and they did it off the back of their youth.
This one off the temper text. Fellas, how about you give some more credit to the Hawks after losing the unlosable against Richmond? Have won 2 games in a row against top 8 teams that have challenged them. Hawks have learnt quickly how to control a game. Why don't you give them some more love is the question without notice.
Yeah, love it. I gave them a massive rap last week, and I could always have doubled down. But the unfortunate thing for Hawks supporters is they're not going to be going around in September because their football at the moment is as good as any. And the template they use to unpack Collingwood, they took to Western Bulldogs. They play Melbourne this week. So I've been in that position when you actually find a little bit of form and you're not going to be part of the finals. You feel like, okay, well and it's the old cliche, all right, let's shape the finals. Well, the Hawks are doing that. So they play Melbourne on the MCG, which they've had their best performances against Brisbane and Collingwood on the MCG, Hawthorn. They're up and going. Outside of Wingard, they haven't, and that was a tragic injury for him. They've got their tall forwards are looking good. Their backs look organised. They know they've got a couple of stoppers there that are going to, so Oliver and Petrarca, how are they going to feel with McGuinness and Nash floating around?
Can we talk about Newcomb and Day?
Yeah, Newcomb's the one for me. That was his 50th game. So you have 40 touches, kick a goal, 19 kicks, 21 handballs.
Yeah, 10 score involvement. It's as good a midfield game as I've seen, up against a very well-renowned midfield. And
he's my man. I'm taking him.
Well, you can have him. You can. I'm happy. I'll have Day because he's my man. I just think he's emerged as a genuine star. But Newcomb bullied the Western Boys. He actually bullied them.
Yeah, and he stood out last year for them and finished third in the Rising Star. Nick Dacos and Sam De Conning were the ones that finished first and second. But he was a clear number 3 in voting. And he was clearly, Dacos off the back, Sam De Koning a tall back. He was the clear best midfielder, and he came up from half forward, started playing midfield. 50 games into a career out of nowhere, and has been huge. And now he's got mates that have come up around him. Warple's had a better year after a quiet one last year. Will Day's gone into the midfield. They're looking dangerous, Hawthorn, and I reckon that game against Melbourne will be very interesting to watch next week.
Should a player know that they're not allowed to take 12 puffs of a puffer as an elite athlete? So Brady Hough the game was delayed. The game on Saturday night, the derby between West Coast and Fremantle. The game was delayed because Brady Hough had to withdraw from the game on the first bounce because he had taken 12 puffs of a Ventolin after not training all week and been under the weather. And the doctors had a chat to him clearly, and he's explained how many puffs he's had. The doctor's gone, red flag, because that would tip you over the limit of how much Ventolin you're allowed to have. I think it's 6 would have been the maximum amount of puffs that he was able to take. Should an elite athlete, because I didn't know that, but I'm not an asthmatic and I've never had to use a Ventolin. But if you are an AFL footballer, professional, who suffers clearly from asthma, should you know the rules around the limit that you should take?
I think it's just an error from a young player. I mean, he probably might not have been aware of a specific limit, but they're even sharing that information with the doctor, and then that call being made. It's a series of unfortunate events that's come together for that to happen.
Can I ask you about
after the Willie Rioli situation? There's probably not the threshold's pretty strong anyway, but it's not going to take any risks with that.
I would think if you're an AFL player, full-time professional who requires using a puffer and a Ventolin, you should know the limit that you're allowed to take on game day. Pretty important.
It would be part of your education.
Pretty important, I would have thought. What does the result say about your team, Bucks? Let's start on Friday night. It was Collingwood by 8 points.
When you say your team, you don't mean my team.
No, that was
just
timely.
Yeah,
just unfortunate timing.
Well, what it says about Collingwood, and I think that it says more about them, is that they got their game back, and Craig McRae mentioned that it was their pressure game, and that they were able to. And it wasn't until partway through that second quarter when it looked like they were getting pressure on the Cats and being able to turn the ball over in the right places on the field. So they went on a 7-goal run either side of half time. And that took the game out of the Cats' hands, who had largely started the game a lot better, and then put it back into Collingwood's grasp. It was after Darcy Moore had gone off, which was a great sign to show that it's not reliant on any one or two players. And in the end, you've gone and done that without Moore and Dacos in the team at that period. So great signs for Collingwood to be able to withstand that from an individual perspective. I thought the Cats were really good early.
Yeah,
they were. Collingwood's defence looked disorganised in the first quarter, but they were able to buffer that and really played their front half game considerably well in that after quarter time in particular. Swans and Gold Coast?
Swans and Gold Coast. Well, Sydney, they're in ripping form. Thought tactically, John Longmire had a very good day. After half time, they had their way with the extra behind the ball. So Blakey 7 intercept marks, McCartan 5. Thought the pressure around the midfield was good. They were vulnerable at stages for the midfield, and Gold Coast did get some centre bounce dominance early. But when Sydney compete from the midfield, that is their biggest benchmark. Their biggest KPI is the midfield. If they can compete now with their full complement of players, they're a tough proposition. Essendon won and held on by 9 points against North.
Yeah, I reckon this says more about Ben Cunnington. I really think that the North players, the club, if ever, I think North's champions. I think Anthony Stevens, he was one of my favourites way back when. I just had so much respect for the way that he went about his football. Glenn Archer, I look at Ben Cunnington in the same light. Okay. I think he's been an amazing individual within the game. Now, he's quiet, he's unassuming, he's a country kid, and he will always be a country kid. But I think it spoke volumes about his teammates lifting for him, and in a battle that was seesawing, they just found some real drive and commitment to try and send him out as best they could. Just unable to get over the line in the end. But I thought, really about Ben Cunnington and North and what they were able to produce. Brisbane were able to hold on against a fast-finishing Crows.
Yeah, I think it says more about Brisbane, and they're doing enough. And with the talent that they've got in their lineup in the forward half, they just needed to put it together for a couple of finals. And if that is 2 home finals before a grand final, I still think they're in a very good position. So the last 2 weeks have been really important to hold on in close games. But their small forwards, McCarthy, Rayner, Cameron was awesome. Best game he's played in a long time. Bailey's back to some of his best work. So I do love what they've got in the front half. But there's some individuals, including some in the midfield, that will need to lift. But McCluggage had a huge performance as well. So they're in a good spot, the Lions, without setting the world on fire. The best game of the round, and perhaps the best game of the year, was on Saturday night. It was Carlton by 4 points.
Yeah, it has to be the Blues, and that's because of the team that they came up against. It was a finals-like atmosphere. There were key contests everywhere. And Carlton, were able to grind themselves to a really close win, which we've seen can be off the back of 1 or 2 decisions, either by umpires, by coaches, or by players, and that's what a final comes down to. So to be able to beat another formed team who gave a pretty solid account of themselves, but low-scoring battle, but still riveting and brilliant to watch. So all power to the Blues. They've been able to prove and reinforce their position in the top 8. They had a couple of results go that way. That 4th spot's still up for grabs, depending on how Sydney-Melbourne plays out. Is it Sydney-Melbourne? No, Hawthorn-Melbourne this weekend. West Coast and Freo. And you were one of the few that actually watched this game.
I did. I was in the AFL, had multiple screens and watched a bit of it, and watched Fremantle pile on 17 consecutive goals after West Coast kicked the first 2. Says more about the West Coast Eagles and just the dire situation that they're in. Fremantle's biggest win in a derby. Perhaps that is the catalyst for change at the Eagles, which they've been so arrogant and reluctant to do anything about. The Hawks, we've touched on a lot. They got it done, but who does the result say more about?
Yeah, well, shout out to Sam from Bendigo, obviously a Hawthorn supporter. Didn't think that they'd be discussed in speech volumes, but Hawthorn. I'm going to say Hawthorn. And it's their ability to find better as the season has worn on. Their template is doing damage to some good sides. So Collingwood last week, Dogs this week. They go into Melbourne. I'm fascinated to see what they can do on the MCG against Melbourne this week. They keep the ball off the opposition. They spread the ground. They tic-tac the ball with short use. They take a lot of high uncontested marks. They actually prevent the opposition from getting high touches. So Western Bulldogs only had just shy of 300. Collingwood,
which is unheard of for the Dogs.
And Collingwood only had just over 300. Yeah. So their side, like their last 2 weeks, they win enough of it and then they look after it. Fascinating to see what they can do next week with the template that they've got going at the moment. St Kilda were really strong against a disappointing Richmond.
Yeah, so let's give the Saints their flowers, because the way that they moved the ball was excellent, and we've been critical of that throughout stages, but their transition. So to slow Richmond up with them going inside 50, create a contest, win it, and then go, they made Richmond look pedestrian and slow, dominated through the midfield, and then Max King got one-on-one matchups and made the Richmond defence look foolish. So terrific performance from the Saints, in particular with the way that they moved the ball. So credit to them. And finally, you touched on this in the Bucks stops, but Port Adelaide by 51 against the Giants.
Yeah, Port were good. And the young midfield, Rosie, Butters, Horn-Francis. I love Drew. Bergman had a huge first quarter. Houston off the back. Farrell with his use. I think he can be so in the contest at times, but his use is huge. And I think they got GWS a little bit undermanned. You're not often going to lose two of your most important high forwards in Daniels and Bedford for a week, both at the same time, and I think that really hurt them. But Port Adelaide, when you've got 4 L's in a row there, even though some of those are really strong performances, it's really important to be able to get it. And that's exactly what took place, and Port deserve their chance to go and get a top 2 with Collingwood playing Brisbane this week.
It was a terrific performance, I thought. Give us the good oil, Tom, on Ken Hinkley and his coaching future.
Okay, so let's slice through this, and I'll be interested to see whether this lines up with what you know as well, Kane. But Josh Carr is highly likely to succeed Ken Hinkley as Port Adelaide senior coach in 2026. Certainly when I spoke to Port Adelaide footy boss Chris Davies a while ago, he said that Josh Carr is a senior coach in waiting. But there will be no curability agreement here. There's no Buckley Malthouse, there's no Ruse Goodwin arrangement that will make this formal. Only that Josh Carr will stay at Port, as reported by Cal Toomey on Saturday, and that he will take over from Ken Hinkley when Hinkley is done after this 2-year deal gets formalised in the next 2 weeks.
Do you think that's in writing for Josh Carr?
I don't think it will be, no. The reason that Josh Carr is staying at Port Adelaide is not primarily because of this potential to take over from Ken Hinkley. It's for family reasons. He's settled, he's got 4 kids, as you'd know, in Adelaide, and that's the reason that he's staying there. This is just an added benefit of that. And I want to make that very clear, that there's no official arrangement, there's no succession plan, but it is highly likely to happen.
Okay, so just a handshake agreement almost.
A gentleman's agreement.
That Josh Carr will take over.
I think it's just a nod and a wink.
I think
you're our man.
Well, I think he had that nod and a wink for this year, upcoming.
Yeah. Do you reckon?
I do.
Yeah, okay. Do you know that, or is that what you...
I've got an inkling that was the handshake agreement.
Well, that's probably what's taken a little bit of time to actually work that through. And whilst the team has been going well on the surface, the ability of the power brokers to navigate that challenge between Josh Carr believing that he was going to be taking over next year, between Ken Hinkley wanting to stay on for a couple more years, it's a great sign for the club and those two individuals if they're able to come together to find an arrangement that works for the club.
My understanding is that Ken Hinkley is also fully supportive of Josh Carr being a senior coach at Port Adelaide after he is done. And it will be a 2-year deal for Ken Hinkley, and it will be ticked off officially in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, the deal's done, and it's the perfect result for Port Adelaide. To Bucks' point, they've handled it perfectly. You don't lose Josh Carr, who they would not have wanted to lose, and you keep a coach who's coaching at the top of his game, and there's no disruptions heading into a final series where you've qualified for top 4. It's ideal. Let's work our way through some contract and
trade
news.
Can I put a rider on that one?
Yep.
Just thinking aloud. Things will change and will evolve over that 2-year period, and it's worth keeping that open and understanding it's good not having it defined as such. It's better to understand that things will shift and change, and that you need to stay open to that and take the ego out of it.
Yeah, I say when we've got a bit more time. In fact, maybe I'd love to hear you explore that with Jared tomorrow, just on your experience of that, because you're the best person to speak about that. We don't quite have time with how busy our show is this morning, but hopefully you can go in depth with that at some stage.
Yeah, love to. Not.
Let's talk about some contract and trade news.
Okay, let's go to Adelaide first. Rory Sloane, this is where things sit as we speak. If he wants to play on and understands that he will, or is a chance to play some SANFL footy, then Adelaide will offer him a contract. So as long as he's prepared for that, he'll be at the club next year. Now, Adelaide's not necessarily looking to get any younger. It's not like they're looking to go out and get 20, 21-year-olds, which means there's still hope for Matt Crouch to stay on the list, potentially on a 1-year deal. As of a couple of weeks ago, there wasn't a lot of interest in Matt Crouch elsewhere. List spots are tight.
There will be now.
Well, there probably will be now, but a couple of weeks ago there wasn't. I still think he's a chance to stay on the list on a 1-year deal, because even given his form the last couple of weeks, and the fact that the Crows aren't looking to get any younger necessarily. Tom Doedee, this is complex. He's done 2 ACLs. He won't play for much of next year. He's only 26 and he wants career certainty, i.e. a long-term deal. The Crows want him to stay, but probably won't give him the career certainty that he wants. The Sydney Swans were interested to a degree, but they want a defender for next year, not 2025. I'm not sure if the Brisbane interest was actually legitimate or not, or serious. So I think Tom Doedee will end up signing a shorter deal than what he wants at the Crows, but I don't think that there's many other options for him at the moment, given that he won't play for most of next year.
Complicated. Ideally, someone like a Hawthorn, someone who can be a bit more patient with him but still get a long-term player would be the right destination.
He wants career certainty.
If he wanted that certainty, because a club like Brisbane, Sydney, they're in it for the now.
Yeah.
And they probably don't have the time to wait. Let's go to the Bombers.
Dyson Heppel, if he wants to go on, Essendon's highly likely to offer him a deal.
Been all right,
for
Heppel.
next year. Yeah, this time last year, you would have said there's a 1% chance of him playing in 2024. But at the moment, there's a good chance of him playing next year if he wants it. They're impressed with the way he's gone this year. Darcy Parish, a lot's been spoken about him. Sammy Edmonds spoken a lot about him. He's got a long-term deal on the table that would make him a Don for life. He wants to stay. Rival clubs I've spoken to, several of them do believe he will stay, but there's clearly a hold-up on contractual details. And Essendon's supremely confident he'll stay as well. We'll see how it plays out, but it's interesting it hasn't been done yet.
I think managers have got a bit to play in this.
Yeah.
You can sort of go too hard for your individual player to a point where you compromise what the club needs to do. So they've got to work together with the club to make sure that their player is looked after and part of a squad that they want to be a part of as well.
Let's move on to Port Adelaide.
Mitch Georgiadis, so he still hasn't made a decision on his future, but there is a 4-year deal in front of him, which will take him through to free agency, the end of 2027. As for Travis Boak, your man Kane, there'll be a contract for him if he wants it. It's a bit like Robbie Gray.
He wants it.
Next year, well, then he'll play on then.
He wants to play forever.
Okay,
Travis
well,
Boak.
then he'll play on then.
Yeah.
But Robbie Gray last year, they said it's up to you and he ended up retiring. West Coast said to Luke Shuey, it's up to you, he retired. If you believe that Travis Boak wants to play, then he'll play on in 2024.
Tom Jonas?
I don't think the same will be afforded to Tom Jonas as the club looks at luring it one of or more than one of Brandon Zerk-Thatcher, Sava Ratugolea or Harry Mackay to the club. So I don't expect Tom Jonas to beat the club next year.
Yeah, I agree with that one. Let's move on to the Saints.
Yeah, just while I'm on veterans, just quickly, Jack Rewalt, I'm not sure whether he's playing on or not. I don't know whether it's his call or whether the club's call, but I think it's highly unlikely he'll be at the club in 2024.
Why would it be his call, Alex? Well, why would clubs leave it to him? And are they too afraid to make hard decisions on champions of the club?
No, I think in the end, the way that this gets communicated, the coach goes, you've been a great servant for us. I don't want you to finish your football in the twos. Mm-hmm. And then it's up to the individual to work out, well, I think that my leadership and I can help other players along, and the club's got to work that out. Now, when you don't have an incumbent senior coach, it makes it a little difficult because that has an input, and it probably will be part of Jack's decision. I wouldn't think that the club or he would commit to another 12 months without having a conversation with whoever is given that role going forward.
I would have thought it was pretty obvious that he retires from my outside perspective.
He's been pretty good. He's
been okay, but it's time.
No, but he doesn't need to be. He doesn't need to play 22 games as the key forward, but he'd be handy as a backup. And you do, and we've seen, with injury lists and depth, it's important to have.
So St Kilda has a few unsigned players. It's probably the most unspoken story in this, ahead of this trade period at the moment. Jade Gresham, Hunter Clark, Daniel McKenzie, Nick Caulfield and Zach Jones, all unsigned. That's a lot of money tied up in those players and a fair bit of uncertainty for established players as well, especially given they're 6th on the ladder. Now, the Saints are leaving their options open here. They want flexibility in the trade period. They want to go to the draft. That's what they've told other clubs. But they also have players who are contracted, which rival clubs perceive as available. One of these is Tim Membry, contracted to the end of next year. The other is Jack Billings, who's on good cash for the next season. I'm told next 2 seasons. I'm told up to $1 million over 2 years. So it's $500,000 for 2024, $500,000 for 2025. He's keen for regular opportunities and would be open to a move if that's not available at St Kilda, and St Kilda's open to trading him. I'm just not sure whether there's a market for Jack Billings at the moment, pick 3 in 2013. As I said, list spots are tight, and list managers expect as few as 45 to 50 players taken in this year's national draft.
And finally on the Gold Coast.
Looking at Sam Flanders, all parties expect him to stay, though there isn't a lot of movement despite his strong form. So a 2-year deal takes him to free agency. A 4-year deal, I think, is what the Suns would prefer to lock him in for. But at the moment, there's no real movement other than the fact that all parties expect him to stay.
Pretty comprehensive trade update.
Do we have time for more?
There. Well, you got more?
Yeah, I got more.
Who you got?
Got Melbourne. Can we talk about Melbourne quickly?
In 40 seconds.
Okay. So
Grundy staying?
What's that?
Grundy staying?
Grundy's going to request a trade if he can't get into the senior team or can't lock a spot in the senior team. So that will play out at the end of the season. Whether Melbourne accept grant that trade request remains to be seen. But I want to talk about two other players, James Harmes and James Jordan. James Harmes is contracted for next year. He's on more than $500,000 next year, back-ended contract. Tried to get out last year. Wouldn't be surprised if that happens again. He played VFL yesterday. James Jordan is a free agent because he was delisted at the end of 2020. He's got incredibly strong bargaining power because of that. The Swans, the Gold Coast Suns, Essendon, they've all expressed interest. He's played 17 games this year. I don't know whether he's going to re-sign or not, but I know there's a lot of interest in James Jordan.
Fair bit in that. If you want to join in the conversation about how you see it, let us know, 1300 736 736.
And Carlton, let's talk.
Paddy Dow,
Not sure about Paddy Dow. I think he probably goes. The Saints are keen. But
Jack Silvani.
do we have time?
Quick.
Carlton and St Kilda, they're all in on Ireland. So Carlton, I believe, are going to sign at least one, maybe two Category B rookies from Ireland. St Kilda are interested in one Category B rookie from Ireland. And this has been a covert operation. Stephen Silvani, Gubby Allen, maybe Nick Walsh has been over there as well. So keep an eye on Irish players being signed by Carlton and St Kilda in the next couple of weeks.
Tom Morris, thanks to Cobram Estate Premium Australian Extra Virgin Olive Oil.